Thank you all for coming. So this is an event I'm really excited about. I'm Patrick Nickleson, to those I haven't met. I am an assistant professor of music history, musicology here at the University of Alberta. And this is part of a series we do called Questions About Music, where we kind of tend to do, rather than more formal academic research papers, we do kind of conversations and keep things more informal. And Cheryl started that already very well by getting to know all your names, which I'll test her on later.
No. I'll remember a few of the sounds of the few of them. They're like, wow, that's a great name.
And so I'm really glad you all came. This is kind of framed in combination with Music 314, Music in Canada. So about half the audience here are students in Music in Canada, so that feels very familiar, but then plus very nice guests. So thanks all of you for coming, and thanks especially to Cheryl L'Hirondelle for coming. And I would love for Cheryl to introduce herself at length in a minute. But I just wanted to say first that I kind of wanted to invite Cheryl because when I was hired here about 1.5 years ago now, I guess I was hired here almost 2 years ago now, I knew that I'd be teaching Music in Canada, and I knew that these could be a very good means of getting to know Edmonton and Alberta and Treaty 6, as I had never been here before, as a very solidly Southern Ontario person until I was 35 or whatever. And Cheryl was one of the first people I thought of to be someone to kind of come and hang out with and talk to as someone who's from here. And as an artist, I kind of already knew or kind of didn't know because I've kind of, I think, maybe followed Cheryl around the world accidentally even before I knew her. We collaborate with a lot of the same people. We do research on, turns out, kind of a more similar topic than I even realize now as part of her PhD at University College Dublin. We work with people like Dylan Robinson and Peter Morin, who I think students in the class know really well. And she was in Toronto for years, and I was in Toronto, and I'd see her at events, and she was always introducing everyone to each other and being very friendly. And then she was in Dublin for years, and I was in Dublin before I came here. And so it just feels like it was just the most natural, most obvious person that immediately came to my mind as someone to aspire to invite once I had the capacity to do that for someone. And so here, finally, here we are, which is great. So thank you, Cheryl, for being here. And thank you all for coming to hear us speak a little bit. And so we'll talk a bit. We've been talking kind of nonstop since last night when she landed. But we'll kind of converse a bit and cover some kind of general things that I think are super interesting about her music and song. And then we'll make lots of time for you folks to ask some questions too. So please be sure you're taking some notes or saving some thoughts for things you're interested in. Does that sound about right?
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we said we'd start with, I introduced you in terms of how I know you, but who are you?
Oh. Cheryl L'Hirondelle Nitsegason, apito kasanskweo monia, ni hioskweo komistoko no skweo. Amiskwaciy wāskahikan, Papaschase Kikino Metis Settlement, amiskwaciy. So the translation, the quick translation is I'm a half-breed, originally from here, and I live in Saskatchewan now. So there, that's the quick one. Mm-hmm. But I suppose to say who I am musically is I come from the family, the L'Hirondelle family and the Ladisher family. Well-known musical people here in this place and more up north. Fiddle players, guitar players, fabulous singers, fabulous dancers, really big family of very, very talented people. And and I also come from a family that knows how to make a short story really long, so I should probably end it there, just so we can talk about other things.
Okay. That was briefly I thought you'd go, yeah.
Well,
so yes, that's who you are. And then how has your life been? Where did you study music? What did you study? You told me last night that you then promptly stopped studying music. Like where have you been in your career so far?
Well, yeah, what we were talking about last night is he was asking, you were asking if music came first or if visual art came first, because I do both. And I was kind of trying to give you the journey, how it all happened. Coming from a musical family, I was always kind of known as a singer, but I was always, like we are in the creative world, we're always a little bit weird and people don't know where to place us. I don't know if anyone else feels that. So I made my way into the punk world, because it seemed to be natural at the time that, you could be a little off the wall. And this was back in the day of hardcore punk rock before New Wave came in. And so I was in a punk band in Calgary, and it wasn't till after that I decided to go to art college. And that's when the visual art practice came in. But I got kicked out of art college after 1 year. So, then I had to just sort of fly by the seat of my pants, as my mom would say, and try and make my way in the world. So music always stayed a part of my world, and slowly they all started to merge together, where music and visual art were sort of all sort of synesthetically kind of together. But I studied Royal Conservatory of Music. I studied at Montreal College. I've even done some Berkeley College of Music courses. So I've had kind of a bit of a wide array of formal music training. But as we were talking about last night, I had really bad experiences. I've had consistently bad experiences with the music industry. But I still am part of the music industry, but it's taught me a lot about what you have to really be careful about, you know, and maybe you could say that about all of the art world, you know, there's a lot of really tricky rabbit holes you have to be careful about, you know, so it's been a good teaching and a good lesson, and I've somehow navigated a pretty good path that works for me.
Which is great, yeah.
Yeah.
And we can get into any of those rabbit holes or other things if you want to, or not.
We
But
went down a lot of rabbit holes in the last
Yeah.
24 hours, you and I.
yes, okay. But so you did all that, and I mean, this is again part of what made me so interested in what you do, because part of my research has to do with, you know, music in the ways that it reaches out into the rest of the world. And I think a Department of Music is such a good place to do that, because there are so many artists who make music, and there are graphic designers who make music, and there are visual artists and performance artists. And so I'm always really drawn into that. And I think the way you do that in your work has been really well known and really appreciated by a lot of people. And I think of in the last few years, but then the more I read about you and the more I talked to you in the last couple of days, you've been doing that for a long time for a lot of people. And so should we start with like maybe, you know, your master's work and what that project was like, and the way you kind of, you were doing music, but it was not a music project. How do you explain all that? What was Why the Caged Bird Sings about?
Well, you know, in the Native community, when you it's pretty much goes without saying, but when you have a talent, you're meant to share it with your community. That's what you're meant to do. And we had a really great story. I was telling you about the Sarah Denny story, about the Mi'kmaq health representative who was the short story.
You can tell the full version.
Okay, well, it's just a great story. So Sarah Denny was this Mi'kmaq health representative in the 60s, and the Mi'kmaq were, of course, the East Coast people, and she had gone to a conference in Ottawa, and somebody from the Archives of Canada knew that there were all these Native people from all across Canada going to be there, and this person needed to find a Mi'kmaq person, and they found her. They found Sarah Denny. So they gave her these wax cylinders, and they said, "These are your songs." And she says, "Well, how do I play them?" So that they made recordings on cassette, back in the day of cassette. And she went back to her nation, and she played them for the Grand Council of Chiefs and said, "I've been given these songs by an archivist. They're our songs." And they listened to them, and they all recognized even who the name of the family and that chief and how many generations before that had been recorded. And those songs, they didn't know about those songs because they'd been so heavily colonized, Christian, and those songs were not being sung or performed or played or practiced in ceremony. And so she asked them, she said, "What do I do with these songs?" And the Grand Council of Chiefs said, "Well, you're a health representative, and your job is to heal the people. So you need to make sure those songs get learned and listened to by all Mi'kmaq people, because that's how we'll heal our community." And so that's just sort of a gorgeous story about the importance, that when we have a gift, and it's our job to use our gift in our community for our people. So for me, with Why the Caged Bird Sings, is I had been going into correctional facilities, and I had been performing as part of the duo Nigamuk. And I think we got a photo that you can put of Nigamuk up here.
Yeah.
So that was an album I made in 2000 with Joseph Natauha, and we were called Nigamuk. And he and I had been going into correctional facilities to sing, and usually a lot of times they'd invite us in if there was a really big murder case or something where they really needed the population to feel okay because there was just so much turmoil going on. So we'd come in and we'd perform, and we'd tell stories and sing, and sometimes just tell jokes, whatever. And I went into one facility with Joseph, and it became my master's project, because at one point there was a couple women sitting kind of where you're sitting, Ken, And they walked in, and you could tell they were not having a good day, and in fact, they wanted to make trouble. And I was like, okay, well, as a performer, you know that you need to kind of make your audience come on the journey with you, right? So I was really, really thinking, like, what am I going to do? And there's a song that Black Lodge singers do. They have an album, actually, and it's all powwow songs of kids' songs, but they've changed it into powwow songs. And one of the songs is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, done powwow style. And it's always a great crowd pleaser. You can say to just about any crowd of people, who here knows a powwow song? And maybe one person will put their hand up, and I'll go, I think there's a powwow song that you all know, and we do, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And everyone would laugh, and everyone would sing along because they knew the song. Like, incredible. I know a powwow song. So I tried that on this group, and I was trying to appease these two women at the front. And in the middle of the crowd, a young woman stands up and says, are you going to sing the Strong Woman song? And I went, you know that song? This is not the song I was going to do. And she said, yeah, my mother was at P4W. And my heart just sunk that here was second generation person who'd been incarcerated in a family, you know. She's in a provincial, her mother had been in a federal, and I was like, oh. So I said, well, you obviously know the story, why don't you tell the story about the song? And she goes, well, you're on stage performing, why don't you tell it? And I was like, thanks for putting me in my place. So I told the story, and it's a long story that is too long to tell here. It's a really important story about this song. And so I told the story to the group, and after I finished telling the story, the two women that were sitting at the front, they were like with me. They were willing to go wherever I wanted to go. And when I said, who wants to sing the song? Everyone, even the guards, all the program staff, everyone wanted to sing that song because they realized that was their song, you know? And that was how I started that master's project, was I realized everyone needs their own song. You know, like everyone, there's a power in when your voice and the song that you're singing is yours. And when you're singing it out to the world, you are being like a bird in a tree singing its song. You are echolocating yourself in time, place. And so that's why the Cage Birds Sing started. I developed a methodology on how to sing, on how to write lyrics with a group of incarcerated beings who became my co-writers of the song. And their voices, their words, their ideas, and it was through consensus training that we, a consensus model rather, that we were able to sort of agree on how the song would go and what it would be about based on the words that they had written. And I would write the melody because they come really fast because I listen to birds. Birds are really great informants on melody. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. And so what has become of that? You wrote a very lovely thesis that has an appendix with kind of the contracts and your kind of the infrastructure you use for ownership on these songs and stuff, but also what else came of that? Are you recording them? Are you working with those songs still?
Yeah, we recorded all the songs, and in fact, one of the songs I couldn't record. The reason how it works in Corrections Canada is that wardens set the rules in their own facility. So you never have sort of carte blanche rules. And the reason is, it's clear. You don't want an inmate from this prison who gets transferred to that prison to know all the rules. That's the reason you've transferred them, is you're trying to sort of, you know, colonize them. You're trying to make them obey, whatever, you know. And so that's why each facility has their own rules. The warden sets the own rules. So there was one facility where the warden said, you can come in and do your song project, but you can't record their voices. And so we're actually recording the song right now as I speak. I decided that because I couldn't get the 15 women who co-wrote the song, I only am in touch with about 5 of them. I decided I'm going to ask 15 Indigenous women who have beautiful voices all across this land. And right now they're all recording the song, and then we will mix it all together, and it'll just be a really beautiful way to really honor all those co-writers. So that's the final song. But usually what happens is every iteration on the final day, it's a 5-day process. So walk in cold, you don't know me, and by day 4 we're rehearsing the song because we've now married the words to the lyric, to the melody. And then day 5, I bring in recording equipment, and we get them all to sing several takes of it, and then I go in for a weekend work with a co-producer, and we turn it into a song. And we have, I released them as singles, and then back in the day when we had 45s, and you'd always have an A-side and a B-side, the A-side was the song with all of their voices, and the B-side was a karaoke version. And as I was telling you, it was because I realized that not everyone has access or training with a tempered instrument. So it's really important that they could walk into an open mic and they could hand the CD over, and I also give them a flash drive of the song as well on a flash drive. And it's like you can walk in anywhere and you can sing your song. This is your song. And also I have a music publishing company that manages the rights, because I've guaranteed to every single songwriter that they will never be ripped off, and I have an escrow fund where their money sits there until they make contact with me, or until I can find them. I'm always trolling social media accounts. I'm always trolling obituaries. It's like, you know, it's kind of part of my crazy world now where I'm stalking about 100 people to try and, you know, find them. And right now also Commonweal Community Arts in Saskatchewan, who funded many of the songs. They had some money left over from a project, and it was earmarked for Why the Cage Bird Sings for an exhibition that we had last year. And so I'm making a double album right now, so it'll be a limited edition vinyl. So it'll be kind of like Peter Moran's Love Songs to End Colonization, where the A-side, or one album is the A-side songs, and the other album is the B-side songs. Now the artwork is all from the former inmates, former participants, and sometimes not, sometimes just other folks in the facility who make pictures. And so it's their artwork, their songs, their words. It's theirs. Even the actually on the graphic, it's you know, there's always a backstory. I went to P4W, and before they had ripped all the walls down, I took photos of some of the concrete from the walls that used to be around P4W, and that's actually even on the album cover. That's the concrete background. So,
okay, is P4W the one in Kingston? Okay,
yeah.
So the penitentiary in Kingston.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Prison for women. Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. So that was your master's project.
That was my master's project.
And what are you up to? Because you finished that 2016, 2015?
2015.
But you're still doing it. It still carries on. And what else are you up to now? So currently Cheryl's doing a PhD at University College Dublin, where I did my postdoc. We didn't meet there either.
No? But we kind of have
Here we are.
similar
And
vibrations, right?
What are you working on there? Tea break.
I should have done that while you were talking.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny, 2008 was kind of a power year for me. So that's when I first started writing songs in correctional facilities. And that same year, I had been invited by Glenn Alteen at Grunt Gallery to do a solo exhibition. And he was thinking performance art, because I was doing a lot of performance art for many decades. And I was at the sort of point where I was wanting to really, this was the beginning of the marriage, where I wanted my visual practice and my performative practice and my songwriting practice and my singing practice, and I was doing a lot of net art. And so I wanted to kind of marry them, and so I pitched to him something where I would do this thing that I was calling sonic mapping, which we've discussed is really not what academics would call sonic mapping, but that's, I thought I'd come up with a term. And then I sort of, as I started doing research, went, oh, that's not sonic mapping at all. But at any rate, I realized that because I got kicked out of art college, I didn't really have a materials-based studio practice. Like, for instance, I don't know how to draw, you know, and I'm not a painter. You know, I'm not any of those kinds of disciplines. But I realized I rendered using my voice. I realized I could actually sing things and sing places, like the Sami's yoik things, you know. So that's what I pitched to Glenn Alteen, and this was in 2008. And the project was called Nickleson, Songs Because of the Land. And so really I realized, you know, I needed to kind of take a really deep dive, which is what a PhD is, and I needed to really look at what is at the basis of why that is. Why are there songs because of the land? And it really still is in the same vein of why we all need our own song. You know, what's that all about?
And what have you found so far? Especially, I mean, if you have any thoughts. I mean, you mentioned Sami, which is kind of northern European Arctic. What other kind of things have you found that relate to that, or regionally, or kind of in your own life?
Well, there's so many examples. I mean, if you think of wayfinding, the Maori practice of traveling great distances on water, there was a wayfinding, and it had sonic relationships. If you think of the Indigenous Australians, the song lines, that's not the right term. That's the term we use, right? Or in English we would use. But it is this notion of being very, very precise in singing journeys. Here, there's really great examples. There's so many great examples here of hunters who have songs that they would sing to go hunting with. And it's a way to sort of be speaking to the spirits of the land and those animals and those beings. Most ceremonial songs, if you think of that, the ceremonial songs, they're all dealing with this notion of this relationship of how your, a lot of times your voice is thought of as, you have a twin spirit, and so when you're singing, sometimes you're singing to sort of speak to your twin spirit. And even in ceremony when they go, yeah, that kind of saga way, I mean, that's that notion of it's your twin spirit you're kind of calling to and speaking to. So there's just so many examples. And I think in many ways, the PhD work it's actually against popular music. So it's actually saying we've taken a wrong turn in the notion of how we've commodified everything. And I think when everyone needs to have their own song, it's a song that can't be commodified, because it has to be a song that's about forging right relations with land. It's your private song that you sing to your land base and to your land, or where you are to be in right relations with your land. And I'm really looking at sound shapes from languages, because we realize that with Cree language, for instance, we can break things down right to the sound shapes, and they have deep, deep, deep meaning in those sound shapes. So, and I think through a process of listening, of deep listening, which I know is Pauline Oliveros' kind of claim, but hers is more sort of in that performative nature. And I'm sort of looking at it more in this notion of, if we take the headphones off, and if we try to, get past the sounds of car engines revving, and just really listen. And I think someone who really inspired that was Robin Wall Kimmerer, if you know that book, Braiding Sweetgrass. Because she has a part in that book where she says the plants have their own stories and they have their own songs. And so we need to listen. We need to go out and listen very deeply.
And you're working on a song on that right now too, aren't you?
I did the song already. 2018, my cousin Shane Belcourt, that's Christy Belcourt's brother. Those are some of my relatives, some of my famous relatives. And Shane has this program on APTN called Amplify. And he asked me if I would think about writing a song that was inspired. And the first thing he said was a book. And then he goes on to say an event, an occasion, a ceremony, But as soon as he said book, I said, oh, I know exactly. I would write a song based on Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass. Because when I heard that about the plants, I wept. I just wept. I just went, wow, that's so profound. I've been listening to birds for decades. I didn't think to listen to the plants. So,
thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to think of, so to get into your kind of your title, our title for the day too, that kind of term, because I think part of what makes me so excited about like your work and your work in song is that it feels so different to how, and maybe it's not that it's something totally out of. It's maybe more a musicological problem that songs have very specific kind of formal meanings and functions and histories, and the way that you talk about songs, the fact that they're kind of all art projects and they have prompts and they're related to things, and or in the case of the health worker, that they do health things. So what does this kind of idea to you of song forms mean? Or if I'm totally in the wrong direction with framing that question that way, I'm sorry, but we didn't choose songs and survival. It was song forms and survivance. So where do those kind of terms come from to you and in your work?
Well, different song forms are have different purposes. Just like you could think of being in a kitchen, all your kitchen utensils. You wouldn't use your potato masher to whip up a froth. You use your frother. And you know what your utensils are for. So in the same way, different song forms have very specific reasons and meanings. And in ceremonial song forms, they're very tied to the land, and they're also very tied to seasonal times of year. And that's another thing against commodification, that, you know, why would you be playing a chicken dance song not in that season, you know? It's meant for that time when you hear them thumping on the land. If you go out on the land and you hear the prairie chickens, that beautiful sound, you know, that's why those songs are from that time of year, and that's why that ceremony happens at that time of year. So I think there's something really important that we need to look at, you know, instead of just this carte blanche, let's commodify. And I told you the story about how I had been sitting on a Canada Council jury. This was back in the day when there used to be the sound recording program at the Canada Council before they did the big conversion. And the music came from Canadian, or the money came from Canadian Heritage, and it was always a nice sum. If you could get one of those grants, it meant you were going to make a really good album. And so there was a lot of world music, a lot of different contemporary music, a lot of even you know, noise and music actuelle and all those different sound types of music. And I was sitting on a jury, and there was the Haida came in with these wax cylinders that they wanted to turn into a box album set. And it was songs that similarly they had been given these wax cylinders, and they wanted to compile them all, remaster them, do all the work they needed to do, write a whole didactic booklet that would go along with it. And you know, how it works at the Canada Council is they'll always have like an Indigenous person if there's going to be Indigenous applications, because you're there to defend and explain maybe you know, some specific things that jurors aren't getting about that. And so I was very proudly, like, you know, being the sort of champion of this project. And at the very end, for those of you in the room who've sat on juries and know, there's this point where you sign off, and you actually sign your signature, and it's the final list of who's getting what money. And I waited till every single person signed. And as soon as every person had signed, I said, you do realize you will never hear those songs again unless you go to a potlatch. And everyone went, what? You know, they talked about the box album set. They talked about that. I said, yeah, but nowhere in the application did they say they were going to disseminate it and they were going to send it out to the rest of the world. They very specifically said they were doing this for their community, and you guys all missed it, and you've signed off. We're done. And I was really happy about that, because it meant those songs went back to that community, and they were able to have that many thousands of dollars to make sure that those songs were going to last for generations to come, you know? What were we talking about? I've completely gone off topic. Completely.
Could have been anything.
Does anyone remember what we were just talking about before that? Anyways, it was just such a great...
Yeah, song forms. And you're saying functions and
so it's
locations and reasons. And
so I think it's something we need to look at. I think it's sort of part of the sort of activist work that we're all doing in different ways, you know, that we need to be looking at. How are we caring for, you know, as a curator would do with an exhibition, you know, as any custodian would do with a collection. Like, how are we making sure that we're not just sort of turning these things into, oh, it can become a sample in a pop song or a rap song. You know, that's maybe where I'm going. I'm getting old, so I'm getting kind of crotchety that way. But the other part of the thing about Survivance, and I was mentioning this.
Which photo are you thinking of? Sorry.
I don't know. You can do
Oh.
whatever.
you
Maybe
were
the one
thinking
of
of
me
specific
doing
one.
the Idle No More singing, the one at the
great,
very
yeah.
beginning. So this is me singing during the whole Idle No More movement. And this was a concert in Toronto, and I was singing Papaschase First, which is a round dance. And it's kind of a syncopated 2-2 song rhythm. And you'll hear it here. I'm sure if you've gone to round dances, you know it really well. You know how to dance to a round dance. But what's really interesting, as I mentioned to you, and this is around Survivance, is that in Cree, Ase Mina, and I think it's the same in Anishinaabemowin, they have a similar sense that Ase Mina, it doesn't just mean again to infer that it stopped and then it started again. It actually means still and. Like, it's continuing. So what's really interesting about that to me is that's that survivance. That's that sounding that we know that back in the day when we all used to have like amplifiers, and there used to be an infinity symbol. Remember at the very end, you turn it up as loud as you could, and then there was an infinity symbol. You're too young. You're too young for that. So back in the day, there's a few people who remember the infinity symbol. But what it is that really sound continues. sound reverberations continue. They never end. Just in the same way that the air that we're breathing is still the same air that our ancestors breathed. It might be a little more polluted now, without question, but it's still the same air, so it's still the same sound. So there's this notion of still and, this continuation. And I mentioned to you that a lot of times what happens is in regions, and if you're not in Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal or New York or Berlin or London, any of the big cities around the world, you're kind of like, you're in the regions, right? And I said something that Edmonton needs to be really proud of, and this land, amiskwaciy, wāskahikan, needs to be really proud of, is during the Idle No More movement, which started out as teach-ins, not protests. It started out as a group of 5 Indigenous women going from community to community to say there's this omnibus bill which has all these legislative changes that are going to screw everybody, not just Native people, it's going to screw everybody. That was when the land water, that whole sort of
defenses and
the 1763 Land Water Proclamation. I'm getting the title of it wrong, but that's when that got rescinded. Harper rescinded that, and this was all part of this omnibus legislation. It screwed everybody because it meant that the waters were deprotected. It meant that mining companies and manufacturers and industry could pollute waters, and there was only like 10 rivers or lakes that were still protected in the whole of this land, now known as Canada. Anyways, and many, many more. There was just these huge legislative changes. And this started out as these teach-ins that they would go around and they would say, this is what these omnibus changes will do for everyone. And it was a group of people who went to a teach-in here in Alberta that decided they were going to take it to the legislature. And Dene tea dancers and Cree round dancers showed up, and you can go to YouTube and you can do some Googling and you can listen to the very first example of why the Idle No More movement became about people holding hands and dancing together. It happened here. It happened on the steps of the legislature here in Edmonton, or in the city now called Edmonton, amiskwaciy, wāskahikan. So I think it's really important. I think it's really important that we remember our histories and know the importance of song in place. And this is one place where it made a really huge impact all around the world.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll still loop back to the question because I think you did a good job talking about a lot of things.
You have a hair hanging. I'm just going to pull it. There we go. Okay.
Thank you.
I can kind of see it bobbing up and down.
The song forms. So with the case of your songs, like the Cage Bird Sing songs, or your own songs, or with Nickleson or other ones, they're not ritual songs. Are they still song forms, or are they ritual songs, or how do you understand the kind of song form sense of the songs that you write, for example, in prisons? What is it? What is their functional or ritual ideal to you?
So, everything's a song form, whether it's like a pop song, or whether it's a heavy metal song, or whether it's an aria, or whether it's a round down song or a tea dance. They're all song forms. A form that follows some certain sort of rules of what makes it that song. So with a win, it's the fact that it's that rhythm. So that's. And then there's other things that you're never singing like on the beat, you're slightly singing off the beat. Crow dance is kind of another example. There's always that kind of like you're singing in between the beats, and that's what makes it that song form, right? In fact, apparently you can go onto YouTube and you can watch and listen to Ken Williams' video, Pigeon Powwow. Brilliant. It's hilarious. I recommend it. So just type in Ken Williams Pigeon Powwow. It's very funny. Very funny powwow song. So, these are these song forms. The reason I always asked my co-writers what type of song they wanted to write. And I would never, I would say to them, I don't do heavy metal and I don't do rap. Those are the only two. I don't understand those song forms. I have no knowledge of them. It would be a failure, but I can kind of get my head around country. I can kind of get my head around pop music and get my head around any types of different rhythmic drum songs, so. And then I would always tell a story at the beginning of the project. I never told you this. So I always say at the very beginning of meeting my co-writers, I say, we're not going to write a hurting song, because we could write a song that sort of just talks about all of the crap that has gone on in our lives. But I said, you know what you get when you play a country song backwards? Does anyone know that joke? Yeah? What do you get back?
Get your truck back, you get your dog back, you get your wife back.
Exactly.
Your mother comes back to life.
No, I heard that joke.
That's a great. So I'd always tell that joke. I go, so instead let's try to write a song that sort of is more like a positive mantra, if I can use that word. And that's why they were called freedom songs. It was not to be confused with the civil rights movement and those freedom songs, but for the co-writers, it was them expressing the life that they want to live. The life that they would rather live instead of being incarcerated.
Amazing. Okay, so as we knew would happen, the time is flying by.
Flung by.
And we covered so little of what we said we would, but that's fine. So I would say I'm going to ask you one more question, and then you should all get your questions warmed up, or comments, or anything you like.
And I could say no comment, and then it'd be over to you. just see it.
But if there's any of these images you'd rather return to, but I have one in mind I would go to.
Yeah, that one that you got your finger on.
Which one, this one?
Oh, actually, no, I know where you want to go. Go where you want to go.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go where
is
you
that
want to
okay?
go.
We'll do it. Okay.
Let's do it.
So what's this? Can you give some context on what this is?
This is Tanya Willard. This is her graphic score. It's me, that's me, but the graphic score is by the Secwepemc artist, Tanya Willard. And this is, she was commissioned to create this for the exhibition called Soundings, an exhibition in 5 parts by Dylan Robinson and Candace Hopkins. And this is me singing, interpreting the graphic score in Vienna. I'm not sure if it was, no, the November before last. I can't remember. It was in a November, and it was. That's all I remember.
It's been a while ago. This is pre-COVID, I think.
Yeah, no, it was during.
Okay.
It was during COVID. But it's interesting when graphic scores. People who do graphic scores, they'll write kind of some directions. They'll give you some sense of how they want you to interpret it. And I was telling you, Patrick, that I had kind of stopped performing, and because I was working on a PhD, and I knew something had to give. I was like, I can't do everything, and so I was quite happy to stop singing and stop performing. But then Dylan invited me, and it was actually after Raven Chacon had created a graphic score for me to also sing.
I have that one too.
And I was really happy to do the Raven Chacon one because I realized I could kind of use some extended voice techniques. So do you know what extended voice is? Some of you know what extended voice is. So I was able to do the Raven, which looks quite simple, but his instructions were, you're an old woman giving advice, follow the notation however you want to interpret it, and you'll be performing it in the dark. And I was saying that part of my not wanting to perform anymore was because I was tired of people looking at me. There was just something really nerve-wracking about being on stage and like, they just keep looking at me, stop looking at me. Anyway, so I was really happy. I get to do it in the dark. How awesome is that? But I also really wanted to use all the edges of my voice, all the stuff that you wouldn't sing that would be pretty. Because I've been in my car driving and I've had experiences where I've got my window rolled down and I'm just singing really loudly, and I've had people actually yell at me, don't quit your day job. And I've had to yell back at them and go, this is my day job. I just might not have the voice that you like, And so with Raven's piece, I was able to just focus on those sounds, or those kind of, I was able to use all those kind of gnarly things that would never be thought of as nice singing, And then so with the Tanya piece, when Dylan invited me to do the Tanya piece, her graphic score was so fabulous, because at first I was really daunted. I was like, oh God. But she said there's a coda at the end, and the coda is that round circle with you see it in the kind of middle there? And the coda, for those of you that are music students and know, it means to go back to the beginning and to sing the whole thing through. And her instructions were that the reason she had put a coda in, she's not a musician, but she'd learnt a few of the musical symbols, as you can see. She said, is because it's like, it's okay if you make a mistake and need to go back to the beginning and sing it again. And as soon as she said that, and I may be paraphrasing her really improperly, but the moment she said that, I went, oh, it's about language learning. It's about when you're learning an indigenous language or your mother tongue, and you're taking it back. There's this kindness and compassion that language speakers have where they don't mind you making mistakes, because that's part of the process of how you're going to learn the language. They're very compassionate. So when she said that, I realized that in the same way the song that I wrote around the Robin Wall Kimmerer, which was in Anishinaabemowin and Cree, in this interpretation, all of the round white shapes, which are kind of like, it's a wood pile, that's what it's meant to represent, as a wood pile. All of those bigger pieces of logs that we can see the edges of, those were the vowel sound shapes from Cree language that I would sing, because I knew those sound shapes. And all of the smaller fragments of black shards were, could be like quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, triplets, etc., etc. But they were the sound shapes of the consonant sounds from her language. So I spent time trying to learn and become familiar with enough of the really guttural and interesting aspirated consonant sounds from her language. And that's how I ended up interpreting the piece. And I was really happy that I was able to do that, because I murdered it. It's because I'm not Secwepemc. But it was such an honor for me to get to just go, these sound shapes are really important, They need to be heard, they need to be uttered. And the whole thing about the wood, the pile of wood, is that it's life-sustaining. And that's what we know about our language. Our languages are life-sustaining and life-affirming, and are the things that continue to make us kind of unique and distinct, and kind of part of the antidote of the woes of the world. That's why our languages are important, and our songs. Écoutez, that means that's all.
I was going to add, to turn to the audience, I loved to see that part of the whole show was that Tanya Willard had a fire pit made out of metal, and this kind of floral kind of design was done around the whole bowl of the fire pit. And so I think they had fires a lot of the evenings, kind of after the gallery closed or whatever, they'd have a fire and people would perform to then. And
yeah.
So it was a very expansive, cool score that went in a whole lot of really amazing directions.
Well, I got to perform this in Vienna with Dylan, so it was kind of cool but we didn't have the cauldron, we just had the score, and me wearing my cousin Christy Belcourt's t-shirt, and yeah.
They recently did this one in Europe too, and Cheryl couldn't be there, but they asked Anoni to do the role for her, which, that's a good vote of confidence. Cheryl's part too.
I was kind of blown away, because I was like, what?
Yeah.
A famous person saying my score? Amazing.
But I will stop saying things there, and we should turn to you folks. Any questions?
Put that image on.
Which one?
We'll leave it with
Yeah,
that
cool.
image. Yeah, like that image. Okay. Those are there's some Edmonton gals there, so I just want to put that image up. But any questions, any comments, anything you need to expound on? Please. Please.
Do you want to say what that image is more while people think?
Well, while you think
Scrape
about
the
it,
brains.
I brought, for Nuit Blanche 2022, I had a project of mine called Light Teepee, and it was in Nathan Phillips Square, and it was like a teepee made of light beams, which was about 200 feet high. And I brought together 14 Indigenous women from all across this land, and I had written a round dance song, a happy birthday song. And we sang it on the 30th of September, and then again on the 1st of October for all the children who never came home. So it was for all of those kids. And it was really beautiful. We had like several hundred people in Nathan Phillips Square round dancing with us as we sang that song. Yeah. Yeah. Hi.
So when you're kind of interpreting these scores that aren't really scores and more up to the way you personally see it, like when you were collaborating with the person that made them, did they give you a direction, or is there any author's intent in it, or is it all up to you?
They usually, with a graphic score, there's a sort of, it's not like a list of rules, but it's kind of a list of, think about these things as you're interpreting it. And because I do know Tanya, I did contact her as well and say, this is where I've landed. And she was like, cool, that's amazing. Because she had it interpreted by a lot of different people and some really fabulous, amazing singers from all across this land. And so I was just honored that she thought it was a good idea of what I did. And I love the openness and the freedom that you also have to kind of interpret it the way you want to interpret. It's kind of lovely to sit with. It's kind of like sitting with a drawing for a while and kind of reading the drawing and going, this is what I get out of the drawing. But in this case, you get to actually sonically express it, which is kind of cool. It would be kind of a good practice for everyone to do. We should all do that. We should all get drawings and paintings and things, photographs, and sing them, you know? Be very cool. I think it's a project we've got to work on.
Okay,
All right.
anytime, yeah. I'm a really bad singer, but yeah.
Hey, me too.
No, you're not. Anyone else? Thank you, Nora.
Thank you, yeah.
Yeah, Raven.
You touched on this a little, but I wanted to see if you could articulate it a little bit more. In 2008, when you first went to correctional facilities, what made you, like, what kind of sparked that idea to do that? Because I think that's so awesome.
Well, going into correctional facilities just alone like I have a community engaged practice, and you know, it's just the way I was raised. You know, like I would show up for Christmas at my mom's house, and the house was full of a lot of people I never knew, but she would sort of make it her role to find people who had nowhere to go and make a meal for them. And so I just kind of grew up with that. That was my mom. She taught me that. You help out where you can help out. And so when I first got invited to start going into correctional facilities just to sing, it was like, well, yeah, it makes sense, you know? Something's going on. They need someone to just come in and sing them some songs, tell them some stories, make some jokes, you know? And that's just how you can be empathetic and compassionate, right? And it was the process of being in there and starting to kind of go, oh, this would work. This could work. And then you find organizations who are willing to kind of help out and write the grants, and you find people who are willing to kind of help do a lot of the administrative stuff, so it's not so onerous. So yeah, so it's good to kind of, you know, if you're an artist, if that's what your life is, that's a good sort of thing to always be thinking, you know, like how could this turn into a project, like we just said, you know? Hey, we should sing.
Be bad singers together. Yeah.
Let's be bad singers and
Yeah.
sing paintings or whatever, you know? So it's always kind of, that's the life of being in the arts, is you're always trying to think what would make an interesting project that you want, that you feel like, yeah, I want to get behind this. I've got ideas, you know, so. Hope that answers that. Does that?
Yeah. It sounds so difficult, like, especially when you're talking about the rules and the wardens, right? Like, it sounds like that entire process is not easy.
It taught me a lot, because we've been talking over the last 48 hours, and I definitely am on the left side and sort of more sort of interested in sort of anarchy, really, you know, and that maybe comes from my punk days. But also if you look at natural law from an Indigenous point of view, and we were talking about the Irish version, which is called Brehon law, it has sort of these really kind of anarchistic kind of tendencies, but not anarchy in the way that we're brainwashed by the media to think that, oh, it's all terrorists. It's like, no. Anarchy at a really philosophical level is saying man-made laws are exclusionary. So how do we challenge man-made laws to make things inclusionary? That's sort of the kind of philosophical fundamental of what anarchy is on some level. So for me to go inside facilities and follow the rules, it was really important, because it meant that I really wanted to be there. It meant that I really loved my co-songwriters, and I really wanted us to write a beautiful song together. And so that was my contribution as well, to follow the rules and to make sure nothing bad happened. And in Cree, you know, we say that, namoy nento. It means nothing bad happened, right? Danse, namoy nento, you know, nothing bad happened. So it's also a way that I could be sort of authentic to that as well, and just go, I'll follow the rules because I want this to be good. Yeah. And then you can go home and do what you want.
And constraints that people have chosen can be such functional things too. It could help to have, I mean, of course you've chosen the constraints of the prison, and there's the prisoners who less so.
Yeah.
But I mean, those kind of constraints, I think, even in a lot of kind of anarchic worldviews, the idea of, you know, imposing discipline or imposing routine can be a really productive and, you know, functional process, rather than like, stop, you know.
I love
whatever.
routine. I love routine, actually. That's kind of the flip side of it, eh? For all that I say, all that I profess to be. I mean, I've got to be home for 2 months. For 2 solid months, I've been at home with my cat, and it's the best experience. I'm so sad to leave her.
Other questions or comments for Cheryl?
Hi.
I've been thinking through your talk of this idea of mapping and location and place into music, and I'm curious of how you think of the body fitting in that and mapping the body. It's something I've been thinking of in my own work, but I just wanted to hear some of your thoughts on any little tidbit that I've given in this question.
I wrote just very, very briefly on that, probably like 1 or 2 sentences in an essay that's in the book Code Talkers. It's the Code Talkers book that the University of Calgary published, and it's mostly on Indigenous new media. But I remember writing a sentence or 2 talking about how things become something that we do. And, you know, there's this neural pathway that we go through in our bodies. And if you repeat that enough times, you start to realize that's a good pathway, and it leads to good things, you know. So it becomes, instead of the groove, the trauma groove, you know, if you can sort of sometimes figure out new neural pathways to sort of get through trauma, and if you can make those kind of pathways within yourself, you know, you start to realize, those are life affirming. And even just talking about it, I'm kind of getting shivers up my body, because my body's reminding me, yeah, you have a few of those, you remember those. So I think that is totally part of the work. That's absolutely essential. So I hope you write a lot about that, because we need more of that kind of expression. Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. Yeah.
Still have time for 1 or 2 more.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
You're being fast on these ones.
Sorry, I just wanted clarification on what you mean by like the Irish and like Cree laws of nature. Like, is that consequences or actions have consequences, or more?
Well, natural law is the natural law of balance. So you'll hear that.
Okay.
You'll hear that talk about here, that there is a natural law. And for instance, I remember when I was living in Meadow Lake, and we were living near Flying Dust Reserve. And one day we went over to visit some friends, and we were going to be creating a lodge. And she said, oh, there's a rake and a shovel just outside the door. And so we went and looked, and I said, oh, it's not there. And she said, oh, someone must have needed it. That was it. That was the end of the story.
Oh, okay.
And it isn't this notion of, I've been robbed, call the police. It's just like somebody needed it. And there's this natural law that, you know.
At the end of the day, if you weren't using it, then
Somebody needed it, and maybe they'll bring it back and maybe not, or maybe, you know, somebody will give you one, and it'll all work out. It all works out. If you can kind of realize that there is this natural law happening, you know. And it's something that Leroy Little Bear reminded me of a long time ago. Leroy Little Bear is the amazing Kainai knowledge keeper, elder extraordinaire. I don't know, we can just say so many things about him. But he said the reason when you're walking down the street, and if somebody comes up to you on the street and asks you for money, they recognize that you have more than they have.
they do. And, so
And they're
it's
just
creating,
they're invoking natural law. They're just saying, hey, give me a little
let's
bit.
make it equal.
Let's make it a little more equal. You clearly are dressed nice, and you're dressed for the weather, and you look like you just had lunch. I'm in need. You know, and that was a good reminder. That was a really good reminder of just, you know, there are people every day that are reminding us about natural law. We tend to ignore them, but, you know, that is what. Brehon law, it was an old Irish law. It's spelled Brehon, if you want to check it out. And it's an old Irish law that was really this notion of, in a similar way, there was a natural order to things. That if somebody did something to kill somebody else's bees, and that person wasn't able to live off of the honey that those bees would have produced, they would go to a Brehon law court. This was back in the time of the Druids, and they would talk about it, and there would have to be a recompense for the person who had, even if it was inadvertently, there would have to be a sense that they made reparations to the person who lost their livelihood and probably lost, you know, not money, but a way to live and feed their family. There would have to be this sense of there's this natural order that always needs to be observed so that we're all taken care of.
It was active until I think 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. A lot of the British effort in colonizing Ireland was kind of to fence off Dublin because of the Brehon law. people outside of the fences and stuff. And it's, yeah. And bees are very particular too. Bees were a major, like, kind of supernatural figure. Yeah.
Even for the, I spent time with the Latvians, and the Latvians have their songs, and bees are very important to the Latvians. And the Latvians are very cool. So if anyone never checked out the Latvians, when they were being occupied by the Nazis during the Second World War, of course, you know, it was sort of this eradicate your culture, eradicate your people, annihilate you. So what they did was they actually wrote all their songs down and put them, somebody built a sort of a chest of drawers, and they put all of the songs in this chest of drawers, and then they built a wall over top of it. And they knew once the Nazi occupation ended, they would take that wall down and they would reclaim their songs again. So they had all their songs, and there was a lot of songs about the mythological importance of bees in their worldview. Yeah. Anyways,
People guard
Dinas,
bees, yeah.
that's what the Sami songs are called, Dinas. You had a question.
Yeah, you talked way at the beginning about how, you know, the music industry isn't always kind, and I was wondering how, but you kept coming back to it, so I was wondering how you kind of navigate that love-hate relationship.
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Eh? That's like, yeah, it's like a bad relationship that you can't get out of. You know, it's because it's the world. It's the way of the world. I realize that this is an important thing. That when you write a song, the moment you write a song, you become a music publisher. And so the moment you write a song, you are part of that world of music publishing. And something that a lot of people don't know, but the moment you write a song and you perform that song and somebody pays you a fee for performing, half of that money is actually music publishing money. And that's for you to do the administration side of how that song needs to be administered and upheld and kept. And this is some of the stuff I learned in music publishing when I studied through Berklee School of Music. And it's really tough because in music publishing as well, part of the terminology of music publishing is that when you have a catalog of songs, your job as a music publisher is to exploit your catalog. And that in the native world is not a great notion to tell people, oh, don't worry, I got you covered, I'm going to exploit your songs. Like, you know, that doesn't go across very well. But it's this horrible terminology. So it's, how do you stay in there, as your question is, how do you stay in there and be okay with it? And it's always this kind of trying to translate, trying to contextualize. And my music publishing company, Mio Music, you know, I mean, I have an entertainment lawyer who's on retainer, I have an accountant, and it has to all be sort of really upheld in a way that really honors all the co-writers. And I think in that way, it's the way that I can kind of be my music publishing company. There's a movement in Europe, what's it called? I'm forgetting it at this time of the afternoon. There's something, it's kind of a movement that happened in parts of Europe where corporations that are not sort of corporations that can be ever have hostile takeovers, but they're corporations where the shareholders are the people who are the songwriters, or in the case of a manufacturing company, they are the people who work in the shop, you know? And it's a way that the money that's generated is for the people, you know? And so that's kind of how I try to operate in music, is that I always want to make it as equitable and fair for everybody, so that everyone is getting their fair share. And yeah, just try to be ethical as possible, and to never get what's that word when you get enchanted? Never get enchanted by, you know, fame and infamy and the bright lights. It's like, it's just fleeting. It's fleeting. And in fact, one example I was telling Patrick, I was telling you last night, was a long time ago. I was at a music festival, and there was people, you know, managers, and they were there, and they're looking for new talent. And so they were looking at who was doing the B stages and the smaller stages. And I wasn't performing. I was just there digging the music. And this one lady came up to me and she says, I've been watching you all weekend. Who are you? You know? And I said, so I told her who I was. And she said, are you a musician? And I said, yeah, I write songs. And, you know, it's just kind of, you know. And so we started talking, and I told her, I said, well, I'm native. I'm from northern Alberta, a big half-breed family. And she basically said to me, well, I would manage you, and I would happily manage you, but I would manage you as a white person. And you could go and be native on the weekends when you're with family. And I just walked away. That was a teaching. That was a teaching to sort of say, you know, is it a choice? Probably not. So there. the music business taught you something that you know now. You know that, you could never do that or be that, right? So those are, you have to turn it, you have to twist it to make it like something that works for you, right? Or else it will crush you. It will crush you.
Positive end point. Thank you for that, Cheryl.
Well, it'll try to crush you.
It'll try. You won't let it. We're a little over time, so we should wrap it up. But I'll say that folks who are not in a rush to be anywhere else could come over to the lounge in Old Arts, where we have a little reception set up. So anyone who had a question for Cheryl still and just didn't want to raise it in the room, please feel free to come over to Old Arts. Just the room on the right when you walk into Con Hall. Be there momentarily.
Thank you. I'm really grateful that I got to come and visit. And in Korea, it's gyeokgyuin. It's knowledge transfer. It's visiting, but it was really, it's been lovely. Thank you so much. And in the middle of a snowstorm.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
And yeah, go on over there and come chat more if you have time.
There's food there, isn't there?
There's some sandwiches and some drinks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.